Volkswagen was circling the drain, factories shutting down across Germany for the first time in nearly 90 years, market share hemorrhaging in China, billions flushed into a software division that never worked, and then they flipped the script entirely. A real electric car with real range under $30,000, built right now in Spain and shipping to customers across Europe. That's not even the part that should worry Tesla or Ford or GM. Volkswagen just bet nearly $6 billion on an American startup that's never turned an annual profit to build the software backbone for every vehicle they make going forward. Rivian. Yes, that Rivian. Nobody saw this version of Volkswagen coming. The company that almost missed the entire electric revolution is suddenly moving faster than automakers half its size. And if you're waiting to buy your next EV, this changes the math on what's actually coming and what you should expect to pay for it. There's a catch worth being straight with you about. Reports out of Germany say the cheapest LFP version won't actually hit dealerships right away. Supply constraints on the battery cells mean the first cars off the line will be the pricier 52 kilowatt-hour versions, north of 30,000 euros, with the true entry-level trim arriving toward the end of 2026 or even early 2027. That's a real gap between the announcement and the delivery, and it's fair for skeptics to point that out. But even with that caveat, the direction is unmistakable. The MEB Plus platform underneath the ID. Polo, an evolution of Volkswagen's existing MEB electric architecture, is set to roll out across the rest of the ID lineup, bringing LFP batteries and lower costs to models beyond just this one compact hatchback. The numbers behind the comeback. Now let's actually put some hard numbers on the table, because Volkswagen is turning it around means nothing without the data to back it up, and the full picture here is more complicated and more honest than a highlight reel. In 2025, Volkswagen Group delivered 983,100 fully electric vehicles worldwide. That's up 32% from the year before, when the company's EV sales had actually gone backward. 32% growth in a single year for a company this size is not a small correction. It's a real inflection point. Europe is where that growth is loudest. BEV deliveries on Volkswagen's home continent jumped 66% year over year, with the group's EV market share in Western Europe climbing to nearly 27%. The ID.2.4, ID.2.3, and Skoda Enyaq all landed inside the best-selling EV models on the entire continent. Volkswagen's overall passenger car market share in Western Europe hit 25%, a new high, even with a flood of new competitors crowding into the segment. But here's where the honesty matters, because a good analysis doesn't just cherry-pick the wins. China, Volkswagen's biggest market for decades, kept sliding. BEV deliveries there fell 44% in 2025. The pressure from BYD, XPeng, and other domestic Chinese brands is not slowing down, and Volkswagen is still losing ground on that front, not gaining it. The US picture is genuinely mixed and worth sitting with for a second instead of glossing over. For the full year 2025, Volkswagen's American EV deliveries actually rose over 45% to just under 72,000 units. That sounds like solid momentum. But moving into the first quarter of 2026, US BEV deliveries reportedly plunged nearly 80% down to around 4,000 units, largely tied to tariff pressure and model transition timing. That's the kind of whiplash number that should make you skeptical of any everything's fixed narrative. American EV demand for Volkswagen specifically is choppy, not steadily climbing, and the bottom line financially isn't a clean win either. Volkswagen's full-year 2025 revenue came in at €321.9 billion, roughly flat year over year. But operating profit collapsed to €8.9 billion, down 53% from the year before, dragging the operating margin down to just 2.8%. Porsche alone saw its operating profit crater from €5.3 billion to essentially zero, hammered by weaker China demand, tariffs, and the cost of realigning its own EV strategy. Volkswagen also cut its global workforce by roughly 29,000 jobs as part of this restructuring. So here's the honest read. Volkswagen is genuinely growing EV volume, genuinely improving in Europe, and genuinely building better technology through the Rivian partnership. But profitability is under real pressure. China remains a serious weak spot, and the US EV numbers are volatile enough that nobody should assume the turnaround is finished. This is a company in the middle of a hard, expensive pivot, not a company that's already won. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and drop a like on this video. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about this stuff as much as you do. Alright, let's talk about the part of this story that hits closest to home for American truck buyers. Volkswagen owns the rights to a name most Americans over 40 remember fondly: Scout. The original Scout was an international harvester off-roader from the 1960s and 70s, a genuine competitor to the early Ford Bronco and Jeep. Volkswagen bought the rights to the name and relaunched it as a standalone American brand, headquartered in South Carolina, building electric and range-extended trucks and SUVs specifically for the U.S. market. Two vehicles are coming, the Scout Traveler SUV and the Scout Terra pickup. And this is where the Rivian software deal loops directly back into the truck conversation. Scout's upcoming vehicles will use that same Rivian-developed zonal software and electronics architecture starting around 2027, meaning the same clean, modern digital backbone that's making Rivian's own trucks so well regarded is about to underpin an American-built, German-owned pickup truck brand. Why does this matter for you if you're a Ford, Chevy, or Ram loyalist? Because Scout isn't trying to be a Cybertruck competitor chasing internet spectacle. It's explicitly positioning itself against the trucks Americans already buy and trust. Real towing capacity, real off-road capability, and critically, the option of a range-extending gas engine alongside the pure EV, so buyers who are hesitant about full electric can ease in without range anxiety on a 2,000-mile road trip. That range extender detail is a genuinely smart read of the American market. Most legacy automakers went all in on pure battery electric trucks and got burned when demand didn't match the hype. Look at how the Ford F-150 Lightning has struggled, or how GM had to slow walk its electric Silverado rollout. Volkswagen, through Scout, is hedging that bet by giving truck buyers a bridge option instead of forcing an all-or-nothing decision. Meanwhile, over in China, Volkswagen isn't retreating, it's adapting. Rather than trying to out-China the Chinese automakers with in-house tech that clearly wasn't landing, Volkswagen partnered with XPeng, one of the sharpest EV software companies in the country, to co-develop new models specifically for Chinese buyers. The first result is the ID. ONYX, a sleek electric sedan that looks nothing like the boxy, conservative Volkswagen's Chinese buyers had grown tired of. It's an admission that Volkswagen's old China playbook stopped working, and a genuine attempt to compete on the terms Chinese consumers actually care about now. What this actually means for American buyers and the industry. So does any of this directly put a Volkswagen EV in your driveway tomorrow? If you're in the US, not immediately. The ID. Polo right now is a European car built in Spain for the European market. There's no confirmed date for a US launch of that specific model. If you're a truck or SUV buyer, the Scout brand is the one actually built for you, and it's not shipping until 2027 for the Rivian-based software generation. But the ripple effects reach you faster than the actual cars do. Every time a major automaker proves a real, non-compliance car EV can be built profitably around $29,000, it puts pressure on every competitor selling in the US to justify their own pricing. Tesla has cut Model 3 prices multiple times over the past few years, partly in response to exactly this kind of global pressure. Hyundai, Kia, and Chevrolet have all been racing towards sub-$35,000 EVs. Volkswagen, proving the LFP and simplified platform math works in Europe, adds one more competitor, forcing that price war to keep going, which benefits you even if you never buy a Volkswagen badge yourself. For enthusiasts, the more interesting story is the software one. If Rivian and Volkswagen Technologies actually delivers what it's promising, a clean, modern, Tesla-grade electronic architecture across Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, and Scout, that's a genuine threat to the assumption that only Silicon Valley companies and Chinese automakers can build software-defined vehicles. Well, a 100-year-old German engineering culture admitting it needed outside help and actually executing on that partnership at real speed is a rare and more meaningful story than another flashy concept car reveal. And for skeptics, and you should absolutely stay skeptical here, the honest caveats are real. Volkswagen has broken promises before. The original ID Tant 3 software rollout was genuinely embarrassing. The cheap ID Polo trim is already reportedly delayed by supply issues. Operating profit just fell 53% in a single year. China keeps sliding. U.S. demand is bouncing around unpredictably. None of that erases the possibility that this turnaround stumbles too. Big companies don't change culture overnight just because they sign one good partnership or post one good quarter. But the difference this time is verifiable, incremental progress, actual winter-tested prototypes, actual production cars in actual dealerships, actual battery factories built and running, not just concept car promises and investor day slideshows. That's a meaningfully different pattern than Volkswagen's last few years of EV struggles, and it's exactly why this announcement is landing differently across the industry. So where do you land on this one? Are you cautiously optimistic that Volkswagen just found its footing again? Or are you in the "I'll believe it when the Scout Terra is actually in a dealership camp" after watching legacy automakers overpromise before? If you're new to MotorZen, this is exactly the kind of story we love digging into. Not just the flashy headline, but what's actually true underneath it, what the engineering really means, and what it means for you as a driver. We cover cars from every corner of the world, and we don't pick sides between brands or countries. We just follow wherever the story actually leads. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really happening in the EV market right now, do me a favor, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me what you think Volkswagen's next move should be, and subscribe with the notification bell on so you catch the next one the moment it drops. This channel grows because people like you actually care about getting the real story, not just the headline. See you in the next one. Let's be completely honest about where Volkswagen actually stood just a few years ago, because you can't understand how dramatic this turnaround is without understanding how bad things got first. Volkswagen is the largest car company on the planet by production volume. 10 brands under one roof. Audi, Porsche, Bentley, Bugatti, Skoda, Seat, Cupra, Lamborghini, and the core Volkswagen brand itself. Over 600,000 employees worldwide. A century of engineering heritage that built the Beetle, the Golf, the car that literally put Germany back on wheels after World War II. And in the early 2020s, that giant was stumbling hard. Volkswagen tried to build its own in-house software division called Cariad. The idea made sense on paper. Control your own software stack, instead of depending on outside suppliers the way legacy automakers had always done with everything from transmissions to infotainment systems. The execution was a complete disaster. Launch delays stacked up for years. Buggy infotainment systems shipped in cars that cost €50,000. The ID Todd 3, one of their first serious mass-market EVs, rolled into European dealerships with software so unfinished that reviewers openly mocked it in print. Features that were promised at launch weren't there. Over-the-air updates that were supposed to fix things didn't arrive for months. Internal projects got scrapped halfway through development. Executives got fired. Billions of euros disappeared into a software program that by most honest accounts inside the company never delivered what it promised. Meanwhile, China, Volkswagen's biggest and most profitable market for decades, started slipping away. Chinese buyers who used to default to a Volkswagen badge the way Americans default to a pickup truck started buying BYD, XPeng, and NIO instead. Domestic Chinese brands, not foreign giants, started dominating the world's largest car market. Volkswagen's market share in China dropped hard enough that the company announced it was pulling its Skoda brand out of the country entirely, a market they'd spent decades building. At home in Germany, things got worse. In 2024, Volkswagen announced factory closures on German soil for the first time in the company's history. Let that sit for a second. A company founded in 1937 that survived a world war, that rebuilt from rubble, that became the largest automaker on earth, closing factories in its own home country because the numbers stopped working. 29,000 jobs cut globally as part of the restructuring. Analysts were writing headlines asking whether Volkswagen could actually survive the EV transition or whether it was going to become a cautionary tale, a giant too slow, too bureaucratic, too weighed down by its own legacy to catch up to companies that were born electric. That's the company everyone was writing off. Here's why that story just changed. Volkswagen didn't panic and throw more money at the same broken approach. New CEO Oliver Blume looked at the mess Cariad had become and made a call that a lot of proud engineering cultures never make. Instead of trying to fix everything in-house, he went outside the company entirely, and he went to one of the scrappiest EV startups in America to do it, the $5.8 billion bet that nobody saw coming. In November 2024, Volkswagen did something almost unthinkable for a company its size. It signed a deal with Rivian, the American electric truck startup that at the time had never turned a full-year profit, to build the next generation of software for every Volkswagen Group vehicle. The number attached to that deal is what makes people pay attention. Up to $5.8 billion. Not a small pilot program, not a joint research project. A structural bet on Rivian software architecture becoming the electronic nervous system for Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, and the company's brand new American truck division Scout. Here's why this matters more than it sounds like on paper. Modern cars aren't just mechanical machines anymore. They're computers with wheels attached, the wiring harness, the sensors, the way every system in the car talks to every other system. That's called the electrical and electronic architecture, and it's become one of the single biggest competitive advantages in the entire industry. Tesla figured this out years ago with its own zonal architecture. Fewer computers doing more work, simpler wiring, faster software updates, over-the-air fixes that don't require a dealership visit. Legacy automakers, Volkswagen included, were still running cars with dozens of separate computer modules that barely talk to each other properly. The kind of architecture that makes simple software updates take months of testing because changing one module might break 3 others. Rivian, despite being tiny compared to Volkswagen, had built something genuinely ahead of the curve, a clean, modern zonal architecture that reduced complexity and made the entire vehicle easier to update and improve over time. Volkswagen looked at that and made the humbling but smart decision. Buy in rather than keep bleeding money trying to build it themselves. The joint venture is called Rivian and Volkswagen Technologies, and the progress has been fast by big company standards. Within 12 weeks of forming, the two companies had already integrated Rivian's hardware and software into a Volkswagen test vehicle. That's an almost unheard-of pace for an organization this size. By early 2026, engineering prototypes wearing this new architecture from Volkswagen, Audi, and Scout were already in winter testing, running through brutal cold weather validation in Arjeplog, Sweden, and heat and dust testing in Phoenix, Arizona. And in March 2026, Volkswagen confirmed winter testing was complete. That milestone matters because it unlocked another $1 billion of Volkswagen's investment flowing into Rivian, money tied directly to real engineering progress, not just press release optimism. Rivian's own numbers confirm Volkswagen is now on track to become one of Rivian's largest institutional shareholders, second only to Amazon. Think about the symbolism here for a second. The biggest car company on the planet, with 100 years of engineering pride behind it, is now leaning on a 15-year-old American startup to build the software brain for its future. That's not weakness. That's one of the smartest moves a legacy giant has made in this entire EV war, recognizing the skill gap early and closing it by writing a check instead of pretending the problem doesn't exist. While the software deal was quietly building momentum, Volkswagen was working on something the whole industry could actually see and touch. A genuinely affordable EV. Back in 2023, Volkswagen showed off a concept called the ID to all and promised a production version under 25,000 euros. Plenty of automakers make concept car promises that quietly die in a boardroom 2 years later. This one didn't. In 2026, that concept became real. It's called the ID Polo. Volkswagen brought back one of its most iconic nameplates, the same name that sold over 20 million cars since the 1970s, and gave it an electric heart. Here's what makes the ID Polo genuinely important, not just cheap. It starts at 24,995 euros in Germany, right around $29,000, and for the first time, Volkswagen is using lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry, commonly called LFP, in one of its mainstream EVs. Quick explainer for anyone newer to EVs. Most premium electric cars use nickel manganese cobalt batteries called NMC. They're energy dense and give great range, but the raw materials are expensive and geopolitically messy to source. Cobalt mining is concentrated in the Democratic Republic of Congo under conditions that raise serious ethical questions. Nickel supply chains run through Indonesia and Russia. LFP batteries trade a little bit of energy density for a much lower price tag, better long-term durability, and none of the cobalt supply chain headaches. Tesla figured out how to make LFP work at scale years ago in China. Now Volkswagen is doing the same thing, building the batteries at a brand new factory in Salzgitter, Germany, right on home soil. The entry-level ID Polo comes with a 37 kilowatt-hour LFP pack, good for around 204 miles of range under the WLTP testing cycle. Step up to the 52 kilowatt-hour NMC pack, and you're looking at roughly 283 miles. Power ranges from a modest 114 horsepower entry motor all the way up to a 223 horsepower ID Polo GTI variant landing later in 2026. Yes, Volkswagen brought the GTI badge into the electric era, and enthusiasts have been waiting for that one. And here's a detail that matters more than it sounds like. Volkswagen actually put physical buttons back in the car. After years of criticism over touch-sensitive sliders and capacitive controls that frustrated drivers trying to adjust the volume or the climate without taking their eyes off the road, Volkswagen listened. The ID Polo brings back real switches for audio and climate control. It's a small thing. It's also an admission that the touchscreen everything trend went too far, and a legacy automaker was humble enough to reverse course based on actual customer complaints.